Welcome to Virtualize Everything, where we strive to educate and inform the viewer about technology and technology-related topics. Today's video presentation is going to be about getting started with VMs. This is pretty old information, and it's been around for at least half a year with most of these features, if not longer. But our videos are old, and they don't cover everything in depth. They're kind of piecemeal together, and you might have to watch a couple of videos to get all your information. So I thought I'd make a video with working with VMs today. So we're going to cover getting an ISO into Proxmox, the different ways of doing so, and deleting, creating templates, and maybe a little bit of cloning information, and some basic settings that you might want to be familiar with. We're not going to start the VM and do an install. I've done videos on that, and if there's some relevant information to that later on, I'll do another video. But with that, let's get started. So here's your Proxmox web interface. You guys all know about how to get to that, I'm sure, but if you don't, it's https:/IP address to your server, and then it's a port 8006. Now there's some ways to change that later on, and we'll cover that in a different video. But today, that's what it is. So with that, you can go ahead and you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen something that looks like this. I have a couple of VMs, or actually containers, running already, and I have another storage drive here that we covered how to set up in a different video. But then we have local and local LVM. LVMs actually where containers and VM images are going to be stored. You can see my containers right here. Local is where you store container templates, backups, and ISO images. The first thing we're going to need to start creating a VM is actually an ISO or disk image to install the VM from. So let's get with actually uploading one of them. We can do each now with Proxmox 7. So we'll select ISO images, and we have download from URL and upload. So to do the first one, upload, we click on upload, and this screen shows up. Now for file, we can select, and I have a file in downloads. Let's use the Proxmox one. Probably not a good idea to virtualize Proxmox on Proxmox as far as performance, but sometimes I do things like that so I can easily record a video for you guys. So let's upload this one. We hit open, and a name actually shows up here, but say we want a capital P because we have a little bit of OCD or something. You can also enter a hash algorithm here. I don't have one, so I'm going to leave it as none. Now we can hit upload, and it uploads. So there's the Proxmox VE disk image all uploaded to our Proxmox server. Another way to do it is download from URL. So after clicking that, we're asked for some information. The URL, the file name, and we also have an option to enter hash if we select advanced right here. So let's jump over to another website and let me show you how we're actually going to get that image. We're going to use TrueNAS for this today. And with TrueNAS, we're going to select software and TrueNAS Core. Now we select download, and so now we're presented with our actual download screen. Now once you get to your download screen, depending on the information you have, these steps are going to be pretty similar. The first one is going to be getting the URL to actually download the file for and enter into that URL field. So with that, we have this button, download now. Now if we smash that, as you very well know, it'll just start downloading the file in our browser. But we actually need to get the URL out of this button. So to do that, move your mouse over top of it, right click, and you can select copy link. Now, the terminology may be different if you're using Linux or Mac, but it should be pretty intuitive from this point. So we copy the link, then we go back to our Proxmox web interface, and we just paste that in. All right, so for the name, we can fill in whatever we want. But we do need to make sure that we put our .iso at the end of it. I just simply copied the file name and pasted it in here. We do have a hash algorithm this time from the TrueNAS website. So let's take a look at that. And we see that it's going to be SHA-256. So back here at our Proxmox web interface, we can select under hash algorithm the SHA-256. Now we're asked for a checksum. So back here, we can actually highlight the checksum, copy it, and go back to our Proxmox web interface and paste it in. Now we're ready to actually download this ISO so we can begin working with it. Click download and the process begins. Alrighty, we are finished. And we have a working ISO all downloaded and ready to go. So now let's create a VM. Click Create VM right here, and you're presented with the wizard. Node is going to just be filled out. VM ID, in my case, I'm going to use the default of 102. It's 102 because I'm already using 100 and 101. Give it a name. We're going to call it VE Video. Under OS, this is where we actually select the ISO. Notice we actually also have an option to use physical CD drive if you have one in your server. I actually happen to. But we're going to use this image. It's faster and easier, and we already uploaded them. Let's select TrueNAS. Linux and version will work for TrueNAS, but go ahead and select what you need as needed. Hit Next. System. We're going to use a default graphics card, but there are some other choices here. You may want to take note of Spice if you want to use a multi-monitor system or even a single monitor and you're actually using a Linux system. There's some pretty good features there, like being able to pass the host's USB port through and into the VM. It can be useful for some projects. Serial can also be useful if you're maybe using a Raspberry Pi or if the VM needs to communicate with a serial output. This Vert0 GPU, I believe, is actually the default, but it's a virtualized GPU. And you have a VMware compatible. Not quite sure if this one's for VDI or something similar from VMware. I've never really had an opportunity to use it. And standard VGA. We're going to use default. Machine type. Sometimes it's important for doing certain things to change to Q35, but the default will work in most cases. BIOS. Again, there's a EFI BIOS, and in scenarios like if you're using a Raspberry Pi with Proxmox installed, you actually need to change to that. But then you have CBIOS, which is going to work today on an x86 system. So let's use the default. SCSI controller, Vert0 SCSI is fine. QEMU guest agent, that is really nice to use. It allows Proxmox to communicate with the VM and actually get more realistic information from that VM. But QEMU guest agent will have to be installed on the VM. I do have a video on how to do that if you need to know how to do that. But on a Linux system, it's apt install QEMU guest agent with dashes in between all of the words. Of course, not apt and an install. Those are commands. You put spaces there. But it's qemu-guest-agent. So, with that, you would then select this box if you plan on using it. I'm not going to use it. I'm not entirely sure if we can use it with TrueNAS. That may be an experiment later, and I may do an up-to-date installing TrueNAS video and show you how to get guest agent working, if that's the case and you can use it. So we'll hit next, and we get to set up disks here. Now, disks by default are SCSI. There are some reasons to use SATA. Maybe the number of disks or something like that. I've had a few occasions where I've needed to. Really, SATA and IDE seem to not really be needed over SATA, but that's that. It's there. If there's a scenario where you need it, maybe for a legacy piece of software or something, you have the choice. Cache we can leave as default. I've never had a need to change it. Storage, in my case, is going to be local LVM. But under this drop-down, if you had another drive, say, for storage, or an NFS or a Samba mount or something where you wanted it to go, you could choose it here. Disk size, we can change it as needed. This is, of course, TrueNAS. It's a storage system, and we're probably going to we are going to delete this VM to show you how to delete it. So it really doesn't matter, but you probably would want to update it. 32 gigs is kind of small. Now, if you wanted to add an extra drive, say maybe you had a USB drive on your system and you wanted this TrueNAS VM to be able to work with that USB drive and store things on that USB external drive for maybe a 2+2 backup scenario or something along those lines, or maybe just actual extra storage because you didn't want to use the internal drive in your Proxmox server. You can do that by clicking Add here, and you notice the second drive shows up. Then you would select that storage drive in here and fill it in. Of course, it would already have to have been added in the data center for that USB drive in order to add it here. And when you add it in data center under storage, it shows up right here. There's some good videos on my channel about doing that if you need to know how to do that. We can hit the trash can to delete it, just as I did. SSD emulation, if you need to do that. I believe that uses RAM to sort of accelerate read-write caching to behave more like an SSD. Alright, we can move on. You can set some bandwidth limitations if you need to for speed or reliability issues on your system. It's another good thing to keep in mind. I've really never run into a scenario where I needed them, but they're here if you do. And hitting next, we can fill out some CPU information. So if you notice, the total cores will go up if you increase sockets or increase cores. Now, I haven't really found some good documentation. And part of that's on me because I probably haven't done enough research into this. I always increase cores. Now, if you say have 4 cores here and you increase a socket, notice the total core count jumps to 2. So on this R710, I have 2 CPUs. My understanding of how this should be configured is I have 2 sockets with cores. So say if I'm using 1 core, I'd use either CPU with 1 core of each CPU. That's my understanding. But I would expect to be locked out if I increased this to 3. So I don't know if this virtualizes a 3rd CPU socket, which would say tell TrueNAS that I had 3 independent 1-core CPUs. I think that's how that works. That's how I understand this. If you know more about how this works, go ahead and drop a comment below so I can learn more about it. And also, our viewers that are watching this video can also learn more. If it's really good information and I feel it's not being picked up on by other people, I'll make a video about it. But I'd like it to be under your name. So, moving on. Add your memory here. Minimum memory can be configured as well. So if your system doesn't have enough memory or there's other things going on and this VM just can't have the memory that it needs when it needs to be started, we can configure it to start as little as 1,000 megs. And I've noticed this share has also shown up. I think that means that it'll share a certain amount of this memory for what I set up with other VMs and containers and kind of swap it back and forth. So then, network settings, we can select the bridge that we want to use. By default, our Proxmox sets up VMBR0, which is here. You can also set up VLANs if your network supports VLANs. And you could set up a MAC address if you wanted to, and select your different types of Ethernet controllers. We're just going to use the Vert0 driver that's default for this configuration. But say you were virtualizing something like a firewall, you might want to configure the Intel E1000 for compatibility issues and the Realtek RTL 8136 for a similar reason with something like Windows, so that you could get out of the box Ethernet working. Sometimes Vert drivers don't pass through correctly or Windows doesn't recognize them, although Windows 10 works pretty well with that. I haven't done much with Windows 11. I don't have much desire to even try it out. Maybe with this new system, I'll do that. I know I should do a virtualizing Windows video. We'll see where that goes. Vert0, anyways, that's our choice. Should be your choice for most scenarios, unless you have something custom. You probably are good with Vert0. Now our confirm. Of course, just confirm our settings. You can look through them, see what you got. And you could select Start After Creation here, and actually your VM would start up and you could begin working with it. I don't want that to happen. I'll probably show you how to start it and view the console, but we'll get there in a minute. I don't plan on doing much with the actual install. I want to show you how to work with it and begin so you can do your project. So, finish. Alright, so now here we can see that our VM was created. I get to that window by double-clicking the task down here in this bar, and it shows up. Alright, so under our VM, we have more selections and ability to configure or reconfigure the VM, and also set up backups. So here, and then clicking Backup Now, you can actually do a backup of your VM. It's kind of important, and it makes storing large amounts of data easy, especially if you have something like TrueNAS where you want to keep all your files backed up. It's kind of nice. Monitor, task history, you can see our creation, but if you're logging into consoles or something, that'll also show up here. Options, kind of a few things here to pay attention to is your QEMU guest agent. If you install QEMU afterwards, you'd come in here, select that, hit edit, and select it and turn it on. We're not going to do that right now. Boot order, that can be important for setting up CD-based stuff and certain other projects. You'll see that used sometimes in other videos that I do. That's about all I mess with here. Hot plug, we are selecting network and USB so we can actually activate and deactivate things here. Hardware, this is an important one. So this is the hardware we configured during the wizard. But we can actually pass something like a USB port through here by clicking Add, and then USB drive. And then we can select either use USB port, so we can pass a full port through here, or we could select USB device, and I have a keyboard plugged into the server, so you can see the keyboard here. I could pass just that keyboard, that particular keyboard, through to the VM. Or Spice port. Remember I showed you the Spice display driver? And if you're using the Vert viewer, that comes for Linux, and I believe there's also a version for Mac, but there's some weird compatibility issues there. But if you're using Spice display, you can pass through a host USB port by configuring Spice port here and then clicking Add, and it shows up right there. If you want to ever remove it down the road, you can just select Remove. You can also add things like CD-ROMs, network devices, TPMs. That's needed for Windows 11. Cloud init drive, serial ports, PCI devices. PCI devices are only able to be passed through with systems that support IMMO. We can actually do that on this new R710 server that I have now for doing demo work. So we'll do a video on that later. But from my understanding, that's a video in itself. But I'm kind of looking forward to passing some graphics cards through and doing some graphics acceleration work, maybe with a Windows install or something like that down the road. Make sure that you actually subscribe to this channel. That'll help make sure that I have the resources to purchase a license of Windows to do videos like that. Maybe I'll purchase even a license of Windows 11 so we can do a Windows 11 install. We'll see where we're at and how feasible that is at the time. Also, if you'd like to support us on projects like that, consider checking out our merch store at store.virtualizeeverything.com. Alright, so kind of see the options here. I'll show you how to start it. We're actually going to force shut this down after we start it, and I'm going to show you how to create a template from it, and then how to remove it from the system. Alright, so to start it, we can press Start. And you can kind of look at the summary of the system resources and stuff that the VM's using as it starts. And now, if you want to view it from the web interface, so you can work with it with just the web interface over the system, it's kind of easy and convenient. In a lot of scenarios, you can press Console. Now, there's a little caret facing down here. If you click on that caret, you'll see some other options, Spice and JS. Now, the JS is for your serial, and Spice, of course, is for Spice. No VNC is your typical default VNC viewer. You can actually use a non-web VNC viewer and configure that. We do have a video on that if you want to check that out later on. Let's use no VNC right now. And you can see we actually come up with the TrueNAS installation process. Now, again, I told you I'm not going to go through this, so I'm just going to hit shutdown. Well, no, I want to show you how to do something. So we can close this window out, but the VM still stays running. Now you can hit shutdown here, and that'll shut down the system if it's working and behaving correctly and ready for that shutdown. But say you have a system lockup or freeze or other problem and you need to force the system to stop. Well, you can actually press on this caret here and it brings down some states. You can hibernate it, you can pause it, you can reboot it, you can reset it or do that like reset button push restart, or you can hard stop it. We're going to select hard stop at this point because we want it to shut down. And you'll see down here on the bar that that process happens and it's finished, and you should see the icon, this green sideways facing object, disappear and the logo gray out. So it looks as such now. All right, so with that, we can actually turn this VM into a template. Say we had a Ubuntu system and we wanted to make multiple systems because we were doing multiple different projects, but we all wanted the systems to all be the same, identical, so that we could quickly iterate through versions, maybe test some software. I do this a lot for video demonstrations with like Proxmox or something like that. Of course, you probably won't ever be doing that. But if you want to iterate through and test things fast, that's virtual environments are great for doing that, testing software, developing, learning. So making templates is a fast way to do that. You can just right-click on your VM and clone them, and you can clone each one. But you also can create what's called a template by hitting Convert Template right here. And once you convert it to a template, you can't start that particular image again. It stays in that state just as that. But what you can do is create more images, and those images are all exact copies of the template. Now there's two different versions of that. So if you go here, now you notice all that start and stop and everything disappeared that we had before. Like if you click here where you see the start and everything. And we just have clone. So clicking on just clone, you can see that we have some information. We can give it a new VM ID number, and it always goes one up from the lowest available number after 100. We can give it a new name. We'll just call it VE. You can select resource pools if you have them configured. Now for mode, there's two modes, full clone or linked clone. Full clone means that it's a full exact copy of the drive for that VM. It's an exact copy of that VM. Linked clone is also an exact copy of the VM. But what it does is it takes all of the features from the clone and from the template, and it links them back to the template, only storing what's different between the template and the VM itself that's running. Now over time, that difference is going to get greater and greater and greater, and that image will grow in size. But linked clones traditionally run smaller and are less dependent on resources as far as storage. They're also quicker to create. So if we did a full clone here, it might take 5 minutes. Now that's dependent on your system. If you have a faster system, of course, it's not going to take as long. If you're working on an old like Bulldozer APU laptop, which some people run for home labs, I actually used one in my house for my primary lab system for quite a while. That could take literally 20 minutes to do a full clone. Linked clones are traditionally much faster, less than a minute usually. So for the sake of this video, we're going to do a linked clone, and then we can press clone. Now that happens, and see how fast that is. That's created, it's setting itself up. The question mark disappears, it's ready to go. Now you can see the start and everything that's not here, it shows up here. If you right click on it, you have the option to start, and you can start it just like I showed you how to do with 102. Notice also it kind of groups templates down away from the working VMs and containers. It does that kind of just for organizational, and you might want to vary your numbering schemes and keep that in mind if you're creating a template, because numbering can stay out of order. If you have OCD like I do, that can get really annoying. So with that, the last thing I want to show you today is actually how to get rid of this stuff now that you've created it. So you're working on a project, it goes wrong. You want to start completely fresh with this VM because you just want to throw everything out and stop working with it. You're getting errors, you're getting annoyed, and you just want to start with a clean operating system, do another clone, such, whatever, or you're done with that project, or it didn't work out the way you wanted, whatever your scenario, whatever the reason, it doesn't really matter. So you have more up here, and there's a little caret. You can select that caret, and there's a bunch of different options. You notice your clone and your convert to template are also here. You have manage high availability. That's kind of a cluster thing. If you're watching this video, you probably won't be using that. You have to have 3 systems for high availability and quorum and a couple of different things for that to happen. We'll get to that on a different video. And then we have remove. Remove is what we're going to use for deleting this, of course. And we select remove. Now, you comes up, but notice your remove is grayed out. What you need to enter here is the ID number for the container that you want to remove. So say you clicked remove on 103 like we did here, but you actually wanted to remove 102 and you enter 102 here, it actually stays grayed out. This is kind of like, do you really want to delete this type question. So 103 and remove comes up. Now there's 2 other check boxes here. Purge from job configurations. So that's different things like backup jobs and other things like that. And destroy unreferenced disks owned by this guest. Now that will destroy other things and other contents in the LVM that are tied to this VM or container. And chances are, if you want to delete everything out for that VM, if you're iterating fast or doing something like that, you want to check both of these checkboxes. Just get rid of everything, make sure it's all gone. And now we can just click remove. The job runs, and it goes away. So that's really all you need to know to begin working with VMs. There's other complexities like passing PCI through and stuff, and we'll do videos on them themselves because they're such big contents. If you enjoyed today's video, found it educational, found it helpful, or just want to support Virtualize Everything, consider checking out our merch store. Again, that's at store.virtualizeeverything.com. Also, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Maybe click the bell notification so you can stay up to date with our tutorials. We release tutorials twice a week, usually. Sometimes we get into some occasions where we don't, but as a rule of thumb, we release a tutorial twice a week. Anyways, have a good night.